The year is 1870. The place is the Great Plains of Kansas, a landscape so flat and vast that a man could stand on his wagon and watch the horizon swallow the sun without a single hill to block his view. On the western frontier, where the tallgrass prairie gives way to the rolling hills of the Flint Hills, travelers move slowly. They are families in covered wagons, traders on horseback, lone men drifting between territories. They carry everything they own, their lives packed into wooden boxes and canvas bags. They are searching for land, for gold, for a new beginning. But some travelers are searching for something else entirely. In the southeastern corner of the state, just off the main road between Fort Scott and Fort Scott's less famous neighbor, a small way station sits at the edge of the prairie. It is a modest structure, a ramshackle cabin with a sign swinging from a single nail. The sign reads, in crude letters, Bender's Grocery. To the weary traveler, it is a sight for sore eyes. A place to rest, to buy supplies, to sleep in a bed for the first time in weeks. But what the travelers do not know is that they are walking into a trap. Behind the friendly smile of the woman who greets them at the door lies the heart of a predator. This is the story of the Bloody Benders, the most terrifying family in American history. A family of murderers who lured innocent travelers to their deaths, buried them in an orchard, and vanished into thin air when the law came calling. The investigation would baffle authorities for decades. The case would become a legend, a cautionary tale, a piece of American folklore that would haunt the plains for generations. And at the center of it all was a woman named Kate Bender, a young woman who performed séances, spoke of spirits, and may have been the most prolific female serial killer in American history. To understand what happened in that lonely cabin on the Kansas prairie, you must first understand the world in which it existed. The year is 1870, and America is still bleeding from the Civil War. The conflict ended 5 years ago, but the wounds remain fresh. Young men who survived the war, and there are many, returned home to find their families broken, their farms destroyed, their sense of order shattered. The South lies in ruins, its economy in shambles, its people grappling with the abolition of slavery and the unraveling of their entire way of life. In response to the chaos, a massive westward migration begins. Families from the war-torn states of Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky pack their belongings into wagons and head toward the open plains of Kansas, Nebraska, and beyond. They are seeking land, opportunity, and perhaps most importantly, a fresh start. The Osage Diminished Reserve, a vast tract of land in southeastern Kansas that had been ceded by the Osage Nation after the Civil War, becomes a magnet for settlement. The government offers cheap land to anyone willing to farm it. Speculators, land agents, and settlers flood the region, creating a boomtown atmosphere. But the frontier is a dangerous place. There is no real law enforcement. The nearest sheriff might be 50 miles away, and even he might not be willing to venture into the wilderness. Instead, law is maintained by vigilantism, by the threat of mob justice, or sometimes by sheer luck. It is a place where a man can disappear without a trace, and nobody will ask too many questions. Into this world steps a family of German immigrants. They are the Benders. The family consists of John Bender, his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and their daughter Kate. The exact origins of the Benders are shrouded in mystery. They were reputedly of German descent, possibly from the Rhineland, and settled briefly in Pennsylvania before moving west. Some sources suggest they were originally named Bender in German, a name that translates to cooper or barrel maker, though the family never pursued that profession. They arrive in Labette County, Kansas, in 1871, settling on a small plot of land near the little town of Oswego. It is here that they build their first home, a simple cabin that quickly becomes the talk of the neighborhood. But not for the reasons the Benders might have hoped. The neighbors describe the Benders as strange, aloof, and deeply unsettling. The father, John Bender, is a tall, gaunt man with piercing eyes and a habit of muttering to himself. He is a drunkard and a bully, often seen stumbling through the streets of Oswego with a bottle in his hand, looking for a fight. The mother, Elvira, is a heavy-set woman with a sour disposition. She rarely speaks to anyone, preferring to keep to herself inside the cabin. The son, John Jr., is a quiet, sullen young man with a violent temper. He is known in town for his long, greasy hair and his tendency to stare at people for uncomfortably long periods of time. But it is the daughter, Kate, who truly captivates the imagination of the locals. Kate Bender is a striking woman. She is tall and shapely, with dark hair that she wears loose and flowing, a fashion considered scandalous at the time. Her eyes are sharp and intelligent, with a hint of something unsettling lurking beneath the surface. She dresses in colorful, exotic clothing, often wearing jewelry and headpieces that suggest she sees herself as above the simple farming people of the frontier. Kate is not just a beautiful woman, however. She is also a self-proclaimed spiritualist, a healer, a medium who claims to commune with the dead. In the years after the Civil War, spiritualism is a booming trend across America. Séances, mediumship, and the search for contact with the other side are incredibly popular, particularly among those who lost loved ones in the war. Kate Bender exploits this trend with ruthless efficiency. She claims to have the ability to speak to spirits, to heal the sick, and to divine the future. She holds séances in the family cabin, charging a fee for her services. The locals are both fascinated and frightened by her. They whisper that she has powers, that she can read minds, that she can curse a man with a single glance. Some claim she can communicate with the dead. Others believe she is in league with the devil. The Benders open a small grocery store at their cabin, selling food and supplies to travelers passing through on the Osage Mission Road. They also build a crude inn, a place where weary travelers can rest their heads and sleep in a bed. The store and the inn are intended to bring in much-needed cash, and the family is eager to welcome paying customers. But the Benders have no intention of running an honest business. In the spring of 1873, a farmer named William York stops at the Bender cabin for a meal. He is a wealthy man, well-dressed and carrying a heavy purse. He is on his way to Texas to buy land, and he is flush with cash. The Benders see an opportunity. York is welcomed into the cabin with warm smiles. Kate Bender flirts with him, making him feel comfortable and at ease. She offers him a seat at the table, prepares him a meal, and encourages him to talk about his family, his journey, his plans. But while York is talking, his eyes are fixed on the beautiful medium. He does not notice John Jr. moving silently into position behind him, a heavy hammer in his hand. The blow is sudden, devastating, and entirely unexpected. The hammer crashes into the back of York's skull with a sickening crunch. York collapses onto the table, his face smashing into the plate of food, his body twitching once before going still. Kate Bender does not scream. She does not faint. She merely looks at the body and nods, satisfied. Thus begins the reign of terror of the bloody Benders. Over the next 2 years, the family will murder at least 12 travelers. Some accounts put the number closer to 20, or even 40. The family uses the same deadly formula for each killing. Lure the traveler into the cabin with the promise of food and lodging. Distract them with Kate's charm and the family's hospitality while John Jr. positions himself behind the victim with a hammer. The hammer is the weapon of choice, a heavy sledgehammer designed for breaking rocks, but equally effective for crushing skulls. The evidence is always the same: the victim is struck from behind while seated at the dining table, their head crashing into the plate in front of them. The table, according to the accounts of investigators, is permanently stained with blood and brain matter. The seat in which the victims were killed is called the death seat. After the murder, the family goes to work with unsettling efficiency. They strip the body of all valuables, money, jewelry, clothing, anything that can be sold. They then drag the body through a trapdoor in the floor, into a shallow pit beneath the cabin, where they hastily bury it. The Benders do not hide their crimes well. They do not bury the bodies deeply. In fact, they often bury them so shallowly that the smell of rotting flesh wafts up through the floorboards of their home. Travelers who stop at the cabin comment on the terrible odor, but the Benders explain it away as the smell of a dead animal trapped beneath the floor, or perhaps a leak in the outhouse. The bodies pile up. In the pit beneath the cabin, eventually, at least 12 bodies are interred. The blood soaks into the floorboards and the soil, creating a patch of earth so saturated with gore that it would later be described as a literal slaughterhouse. The Benders, it seems, have created a perfect killing machine. They are patient and methodical, waiting for the right victims: lone travelers, wealthy men, people who will not be missed. They also learned to spot vulnerable travelers, those who are lost, or those who are secretly wanted by the law. But there is a darker element to the Benders' crimes, a possible ritualistic dimension. After Kate Bender's séances, she sometimes leads the family in what they call meetings. During these meetings, the Benders reportedly pray to the devil and engage in strange rituals. Some accounts suggest that the murders are not merely for profit but are also a form of sacrifice to dark forces. One neighbor, Mr. S.F. Jones, later described a night when he saw the Benders' cabin lit by a strange, flickering light, and heard the chanting of hymns that seemed to be sung in a language unknown to him. When he approached the cabin, the chanting stopped, and the Benders told him they were simply having prayers. But the prayers were not prayers to God. They were prayers to something else. The Benders' reign of terror might have continued for years if not for the disappearance of a man named George Lonker. Lonker was a farmer from Fort Scott, a respected member of the community. In 1873, he set off for Fort Scott with his young daughter, intending to sell some land and buy supplies. He never arrived. His brother-in-law, a man named Captain A.P. Morrison, immediately knew something was wrong. Lonker was not the type to simply disappear. He had money, he had a family, and he was a man of routine. Morrison began asking questions, searching for any sign of his missing relation. His investigation led him to the Bender cabin. He had heard rumors of the strange family, of the beautiful woman who claimed to talk to spirits, of the odd smells emanating from the building. He approached the cabin on horseback, perhaps already suspecting the truth. When he arrived, he found the family's daughter, Kate, at the door. She was stunning, with long black hair and piercing eyes. She told Morrison she hadn't seen Lonker, but she seemed to be watching him with a strange intensity. Morrison was not easily intimidated. He offered Kate money to perform a séance and contact Lonker's spirit. He was convinced that the Benders knew more than they were letting on. During the séance, Kate Bender began to speak in a strange voice, claiming to be in contact with the dead. She told Morrison that his brother-in-law was dead, that he had been murdered by a man named McLean, and that he had been buried in a shallow grave somewhere to the east. Morrison was not fooled. The story was too convenient, too vague. He knew that the Benders were lying. But he had no proof, and the nearest law enforcement was too far away to help. He left the cabin, but he was now convinced that the Benders were murderers. When Morrison returned to Fort Scott, he began spreading the word. He told everyone he could about his suspicions, about the strange family on the prairie. A few other locals recalled similar incidents, travelers who had stopped at the Bender cabin and never been seen again. One man had lost his brother on the same road. Another had reported a strange smell coming from the cabin. A group of men from the area decided to investigate the Benders. They were not a posse of lawmen, but a group of concerned citizens, farmers and tradesmen who had had enough of the disappearances. When they arrived at the Bender cabin in early 1874, they found something profoundly unsettling. The cabin was empty. The family had vanished. The men searched the cabin. They found the bloodstained floor, the bloodstained table, and the death seat. They found the trapdoor, and beneath it, the shallow grave filled with bodies. They dug up the remains of at least 12 victims. The bodies were in various states of decomposition, some barely identifiable, some nothing more than skeletons. Among the victims were George Lonker and his daughter, their skulls crushed by the same hammer. The men were horrified. Some vomited. Others simply wept. They had suspected the Benders were involved in the disappearances, but they had never imagined such a scene. The Benders were gone, but they had left a trail of terror. They had also left behind a reputation so fearsome that they would become the stuff of legend. The investigation into the Benders was almost immediate, but the family had vanished into the vastness of the American West. The law, such as it was in the frontier territories, was simply not equipped to track down a family of ruthless killers who had melted into the wilderness. Adding to the confusion was the arrival of the railroad. The railroad was the future. It was the promise of progress, of connection, of a new America. And the town of Oswego, the Benders' hometown, was about to become a major stop on the new line. The railroad brought wealth and opportunity, but it also brought something else, a flood of new people, new stories, and new rumors. In the chaos of the railroad's arrival, the Benders' story was swept up in the tide of progress. The bodies were buried, the cabin was torn down, and the town of Oswego moved on. But the Benders' legend did not fade away. The Benders may have vanished, but the mystery of their fate captured the nation's imagination. In the years following the discovery of the bodies, a massive manhunt was launched for the Bender family. Posters and newspaper articles circulated widely, offering rewards for information leading to their capture. The Benders were officially wanted for at least a dozen murders, and the public was desperate to see them brought to justice. Hundreds of tip-offs were received, but every lead led to a dead end. The family was reportedly spotted in various parts of the country, in New Orleans, in San Francisco, in Canada, even in Mexico. But none of these sightings were ever confirmed. In 1890, a woman claiming to be Kate Bender died in Michigan. She claimed to be Kate Bender on her deathbed and confessed to the murders. She provided details about the crimes that were only known to the perpetrators, the use of the hammer, the location of the bodies, the family's dark rituals. But her confession was never verified. The Bender story had become so famous, so legendary, that it was impossible to separate fact from fiction. Some believe that Kate Bender eventually became a respected member of the community, living a quiet life under a false name. Others believe she died in obscurity, a lonely woman haunted by her past. The fate of John Bender, Elvira, and John Jr. is equally mysterious. Some claim they died in a mysterious fire. Others believe they fled to Canada and lived out their days in hiding. The mystery remains unsolved. The Benders vanished into thin air. The Bloody Benders are remembered today as one of the first true serial killer cases in American history. Their crimes were brutal, their methods cold, and their escape all too easy. The Benders' story is also a reflection of the time in which they lived. The American West was a place of lawlessness, a place where life was cheap and justice was often a matter of luck. The Benders were able to kill with impunity because the law simply could not keep up. But the Benders were not just products of their environment. They were monsters, a family of murderers united in a dark purpose. Their crimes were not just about profit, but about power, about control, about the thrill of killing. The Benders' legacy is one of terror, but it is also one of fascination. We are drawn to the story of the Benders because they represent the darkness that lurks within the human soul. They are a reminder that even in the most ordinary of settings, the most ordinary of families, evil can flourish. The Benders left no survivors. They left no obvious clues. They vanished into the vast and unforgiving landscape of the American West, leaving behind nothing but a trail of bones and a legacy that would haunt the nation for a century. The Benders may have escaped the hangman, but they have not escaped the judgment of history. They are remembered as monsters, as a family of killers who preyed on innocent travelers. And though their fate remains uncertain, the story of the Benders serves as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human heart. The next time you travel through the Kansas Prairie, pass by the ruins of the old cabin, or look out across the vast, empty plains of the American West, think of the Benders. Think of the hammers. Think of the bodies buried in shallow graves. And then ask yourself, what are you really looking at? Is it just a stretch of land, or is it the home of a family of monsters? The answer may be somewhere in between. ## the unanswered question. In the winter of 1874, a young woman named Katie was tending to a farm in Missouri. She was a struggling farmer, doing her best to keep her family afloat after her husband died of fever. One evening, a man named John came to her door, claiming to be lost. He was well-dressed and well-spoken, but his eyes were cold, and he seemed to know too much about her. "Ma'am," he said, "I am looking for a family of travelers who may have passed through this area recently." A family by the name of Bender. Katie looked at him, her heart pounding. She had heard the rumors, the whispers of the bloody Benders, of the murders on the prairie. But she also knew that the man at her door was not a killer. He was too well dressed, too respectable, too clean. "I don't know anything about that," she said, and she shut the door in his face. The man walked away into the darkness, and Katie never saw him again. Years later, when the story of the Benders became known, Katie realized that the man at her door had been a federal marshal, hunting the fugitives. She had sent him away, and in doing so, she had allowed the killers to escape. But the question remains, what if the man at the door had been John Bender? What if the killers had come for her, not for information, but for another victim? Katie lived with that question for the rest of her life. And she never found an answer. Neither did anyone else. The Benders are gone. Their bodies are lost to the wilderness. Their secrets have died with them. The only thing that remains is the story, the legend, the mystery. And the question, who were the bloody Benders, really? Were they simply a family of killers, or were they something more sinister, something that can never truly be understood? The answer is lost to history. But the mystery lives on.